Welcome back to Chapter 17 of America's Boating Club Sail Course. In this chapter, we will be covering heavy weather sailing. Heavy weather is a relative term. It may mean 10 to 15 knots on an inland lake like Clinton for a small sailboat, or on big water like in the BVI's or Lake Michigan. On a larger boat, it might be 18 to 25 knots might be an area to start concern. Dave Tolan, one of my mentors in sailing, used to use the rule of thumb for him was that for miles per hour for every length of the boat was a good safe point. So, for example, he had a 22-foot sailboat. He thought when the wind got above 22, that was more wind than he wanted to deal with. When we sail in the BVI's, in the spring, they have the Christmas winds that generally blow about 25 to 30 down in the January time frame. In those boats, we generally are sailing 40-footers, and they can handle that 25, to 30 knot breeze without any really concern. We might reduce sail a little bit, but they're built to handle it. I remember one time we were in one of our flotillas, we actually got hit by a squall, and I was pretty proud of the way the fleet handled that. Some people reduced sail. Some people, sought shelter in a harbor, and others just went down and cleaned it up and screamed across the channel and just had a great time. And it really, all what that determined is it's a matter of matching our sailboat with the skill of the crew and the comfort level that you're willing to. I guess the short rule of thumb is that when sailing gets hard or it gets uncomfortable on the crew, it's time to reduce sail. When we're racing, we really want to match the conditions to the skill of the crew. I don't ever want to take an inexperienced crew out on a thistle when it's blowing really hard and scare them to death, because then they don't really ever want to come back. However, for an experienced crew, it's exhilarating to take the boat out and scream across the water in a full plane with the water spray flying over your head in those conditions. So what we may want to do is, when we're sailing in these heavy winds, we want to try and shorten sail so that our boat is balanced. We're going back to that balance term. When we get too much breeze, the boat gets out of balance and it's hard to handle. In very heavy wind, I remember sailing on Lake Michigan years ago, and the wind was blowing out of the north, and it was, it wasn't terribly windy. It was maybe only blowing 15 or so. But the waves were really high and choppy. And so we were trying to move the boat from Chicago up to Racine for a weekend regatta, and we're just pounding into the waves. And so what we did was we actually steered off. When I was driving, I steered off the course about 45 degrees into the waves so that the boat wouldn't pound so much. When a boat hits those waves, it stops the boat, and then you get going again, and then you hit the next wave and it stops. So we just kind of take them at an angle across the face of the waves, and then that enables the boat to handle the waves better. When we're going downwind, there's lots of things to consider, because one thing we need to watch out for is as we're going downwind, because we're going downwind, the apparent wind is reduced that we're feeling, and so that we may not be aware of how much the wind is built. So we have to pay attention to our surroundings. Are the whitecaps increasing? Is there more weather helm because there's more pressure on the sail trying to spin the boat? Weather helm might increase as the wind builds up because the boat is heeling more, or we're just having more pressure on the sail as it's let out. So we can ease our main sheet to reduce heeling. That will reduce our weather helm. We could also add twist in the sails by letting the sheets off just slightly, which will then let them open up at the top and depower the sail. The helmsman can also head into the wind a little bit and luff the sails. I was racing down in Tampa Bay, several years ago now, and it was blowing more than I could, comfortably sail. I was sailing out there, but doing poorly. And I asked Greg Fisher, who is a sailmaker and coach, he won the regatta, and asked him what they were doing. And what he said he had been doing was actually he was luffing both the main and the jib to keep the boat flat and the helm balanced. And that enabled him to be fast. And essentially he was luffing the sails the whole race, but was able to keep his boat balanced and then was fast. Also, one of the things we can do when we're going downwind, before we head back upwind, we could reduce our sail area, perhaps by changing it to a smaller jib or putting a reef in. We'll talk about reefing later. One of the other things that I often do sometimes when we're down in the BVIs, if it's blowing really hard, we might put the main up and then turn the motor on, just to give us a little more push and a little more control. One of the things I guess we would want to do is consider, experimenting with your boat to see what makes the boat more stable and give you better maneuverability. One of the things that you might either try just sailing with the main only, or you might try sailing with the jib only. When we go down to the BVI, sometimes, especially as we're trying to get comfortable with the boat, what we might do, because the winds seem, we wouldn't even go out in conditions like we, on Lake Clinton, in conditions like that are normal in the British Virgin Islands. And so we often do to get the crew comfortable is the first day we might just sail with the jib only. And, that gives the boat, good control, let's say. The next day we might try just put the main up and see how that handles. And then the third day, if we're feeling more comfortable with the way boat's handling, we might put the jib up and the main with a reef in. And then the next day we might say, okay, let's go for brick and put the jib up, main up, full speed, and see how it handles. Just the different combinations to see what we're comfortable with and how the boat will respond. One of the things I encourage our new sailors in the Intro to Sailing class when they're learning how to sail is to actually not use the main sheet cleat, because that enables you to release it much more quickly in case you get an unexpected gust of wind or whatever. When I'm racing, actually, I do not use the cleat. I try to keep it uncleated all the time, so then I can more quickly respond to subtle changes in the wind speed. There are some things we can do with our sail trim to also reduce the power and heavier area. One thing we can do is reduce the sail power by flattening the sail, by tightening the halyard and the Cunningham. That moves the draft forward and also reduces the draft. We can tighten the outhaul, which also flattens the bottom part of the sail. We can also reduce some of the pressure on the main sheet by dropping the main sheet traveler down to leeward as the wind builds. You can also reduce the amount of power coming out of the jib by moving the jib lead back, and sometimes you can move it outward. Which that does is increases our twist at the top of the leech. One of the things when I learned last year when I was sailing down in St. Pete, when it was blowing about 18, which is the upper edge of my sailing comfort level for sailing my Thistle, was that I did poorly, but I did finish all the races in those conditions without capsizing. But one of the things I learned is that I should have really been luffing my sails more and holding the boat flatter and reducing the weather helm. So hold the boat flatter, that reduces the weather helm, and in order to hold the boat flatter, we can then reduce, luff the jib and the main much more, trying to keep the leech driving, but let the sail flutter in that way. Here's a video clip of something we won't ever see in Central Illinois, probably not even on Lake Michigan, and certainly not in our trip to the BVIs, but it kind of gives you an idea of what conditions can turn into when we're out sailing. If we were planning to do an ocean crossing where we'd be out for many weeks and wouldn't be able to, we would have to adapt to whatever weather might come, we would carry a couple of extra sails that are built for that heavy weather that we just saw. The storm jib, which is a heavy-duty sail, smaller, led on a pennant to raise it up high so that the waves coming over the bow will not catch on the sail. The main trysail is a storm mainsail that is attached to a track on the mast, and then the clew is attached to a heavy fitting on the deck so that it doesn't pull out, and then it avoids swinging around with the boom. So these are two sail options that people would deploy in very, very heavy weather. Here's a video clip of a laser sailing in heavy wind. It shows how exciting they can be when they're in heavy wind conditions. We probably won't experience these conditions on Clinton Lake ever, but it shows the extent that we could have some exciting rides. Look how flat he's sailing that boat. We're going to analyze the death roll in the next slide more carefully. When we're sailing downwind in heavy air, like in our laser, it's very easy for the boat to get out of balance. What can happen is the center of effort can shift over on us a little bit and cause the boat to spin. In this case, the crew is on the wrong, the sail pressure reduced, and the boat's capsized to windward. The way he could have avoided that would have been to steer down a little bit or to over trim the main. Reefing is necessary when the boat becomes overpowered and cannot be handled by normal sail trim techniques. We've got a jiffy or slab reefing techniques. The jiffy reefing is the most common technique currently used today. It's simple, effective, and quick. We have cringles that are tied into the sail, that are built into the sail that we can use to tie the sails down. So this would be our first reef cringles, and this would be our second reef cringles. And what we would do to set a jiffy reef, we would raise the topping lift to hold the boom up from flopping around too much. We would ease the main and the vang so that the boom could swing more freely. Then we would lower the main halyard and then attach this cringle to a line and attach it to the boom. We would attach both at the outhaul end as well as the gooseneck. And then we would tighten the halyard up again to take the slack out. And then we would tighten the vang and retie our brief points. These are really just to hold the sail from flopping around too much. On my Capri, when I'm out sailing, I usually rig my first and second rig reef points just in case the weather changes when I'm out sailing. And what I would typically do is I would put in the first reef would be a flattening reef, which is just right across. It's just a little bit of, it takes a little bit of the foot out without taking out too much cloth, but it generally makes enough for a 2 or 3 mile an hour overpowering. Then I would, if that's too much, then I would put on the full first reef and try and sail with that. And if that's still out of control, then I would knock it down to the second reef. Here's a reefing system that I haven't seen very much. Some of the newer boats have them rigged in, and what it is an in-mast furling system. And so the way it works is the main actually rolls around a rod inside the mast and rolls up inside it, so we can reduce sail area by rolling it into the mast. In this reefing system, it's a main sail roller reefing system. The sail rolls up around the boom. And so we can change the amount of sail area up in small increments. The disadvantage is that the main sheet has to be attached to the boom back here so that it can rotate. The vang, once you start rolling it up, we can't use the vang anymore because that's attached under the sail. We don't see this too much on modern boats anymore. Now, don't confuse this main roller furling with jib roller furling, which allows the jib to be rolled around the forestay. Here's a case where we would reef the main if you didn't have the jiffy reefing system in place or one of the others. And the way this works is you've got the cringles that are attached across the foot of the sail, and then what you would do is you would lower the halyard down, tie the rope off on these cringles around the boom, and then raise the halyard back up. If you need to take 1 reef or 2 reefs, then do it that way. These are not done too much. These are kind of out of favor at this point, but it's a simple system for use if you don't have the jiffy reefing system. Let's look at our vocabulary for this chapter. Our first one is broach, and that's when a boat turns broadside to the wind, subject to being blown on its side or capsizing. A knockdown is a temporary situation where the wind has blown a boat over on its side because of a sudden increase of wind force. A storm jib is a very strong, small jib built for heavy weather, and a storm's trysail is the mainsail that is also very strong and used in place in heavy weather also. Here's a picture of a boat that actually does both a broach and a knockdown. Here's the broach, and there's the knockdown. This concludes chapter 17 on heavy weather sailing. Our next section will be on storm conditions.